Hi, I'm Reverend Tom R., pastor at Village Church, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this series of Village Connect. It is my hope that you will be able to gather with friends and read these passages together and talk about things that matter to you in your own spiritual life. In this series, we're going to be reading Prison Mail. It's letters from the Apostle Paul, the letter to the congregation in Philippi, and we're also going to read the second letter to Timothy. So let's get started with that. Let me invite you to read Philippians, the first chapter. Read through that with one another, and when you've finished, come back and we'll get the conversation started. Welcome back. So, Paul writes this letter using the form of letters of the ancient world. It begins by identifying the writer. If I were to write you a letter today, I would begin by saying, "Dear," and state your name. But in the ancient world, the writer identified him or herself first. And Paul not only gives his name, but he describes himself as a servant of Jesus Christ or a slave of Jesus Christ. The word is the same. The two most consistent ways that Paul describes himself is he's a servant of Jesus Christ or he's an apostle of Jesus Christ. That's not a statement of rank as much as it is purpose. An apostle is one who is sent. Either way, Paul cannot talk about who he is apart from his calling and ministry related to Jesus Christ. So he identifies himself, and then he identifies to whom he's writing. It's the Philippian congregation, and then a word of grace and peace. And then a common part of these letters is a word of thanksgiving. I give thanks for you. Paul's thanksgivings are often extended, and they will sometimes tell you what's coming. And if we read through this thanksgiving, it becomes clear that they are bonded by their faith in Jesus Christ, and that faith has not made their life easy. Quite to the contrary. Because of their faith, they've known difficulties in their life. And what we know with Paul's particular struggle is that he is in prison. He has been in prison because of his faith. And what appears to be behind the letter is a question from the Philippian congregation where they want to know if Paul is okay. I mean, think about it. It's natural. They've learned that their founding pastor is in prison because of his faith. So word has gotten to Paul, are you okay? The Philippians are concerned for you. And he writes to them, and he gets serious about it in verse 12, where he writes to them, I want you to know, beloved, that what has happened to me has actually served the gospel. For all the guards know that I am in prison for Christ. So this is interesting. They write and ask, or they send word and ask, Paul, are you okay? And his response is, what has happened to me has actually served to spread the gospel. That's his response. He doesn't write back and say, the meals are okay, I'm relatively comfortable, I feel safe enough. None of that. He says, even in prison, I am able to be a servant of Jesus Christ. And as long as I am able to live my faith, then I am okay. That's all you need to know. What has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. It's interesting. He doesn't say that the guards have become Christian. He doesn't say that they believe in Jesus Christ. He just says that they know he does. That's a very important word for us to hear. It's not our first job to make sure that our neighbors believe in Jesus Christ, but it is our calling to ensure that those who encounter us day by day know that our faith is real for us. It's a different kind of ministry if you think of it that way. I don't think in the end Jesus is going to say to me, Tom, why wasn't your neighbor Christian? I think Jesus' only concern is going to be, Tom, were you Christian with your own life? Because the truth is, You are the only one who can be Christian with your life, and your life is the only one with which you can be Christian. What Paul says is, I'm fine. I am living my faith. Even the guards know that's why I'm here, and that is enough for me. But then let me invite you to skip down a little bit. Now, lastly, in this chapter, we skip down to verse 27, and Paul says, live a life that is worthy of the gospel. He's beginning now to speak to something that the Philippians hadn't really asked, but it's in their heart. We think they asked him, Paul, are you okay? But behind that question is, Paul, are we going to be okay? Because, Paul, you're the apostle. You're the one sent by God to do this work, and you're in prison. If this is what happens to you, Paul, what happens to the church? What happens to us? Are we going to be okay? And they're not asking that in an abstract fashion. I don't know the specifics, but something is going on that makes their journey of faith challenged, that makes their journey of faith difficult, because what he tells them here is stand firm and stand together. Love one another, stand together, love one another even when it's difficult, even when it's challenging. Don't love just when it's safe. It's a hard word because you know this about love in your own life. If you love, you are vulnerable. If you love, you make yourself vulnerable to the harshness of life. And it seems that the Philippians, they have some challenge, some pressure. We don't know the specifics, but Paul is encouraging them, you're going to be okay. Now, it doesn't mean your circumstances are going to be okay. What Paul is telling them is the love of God will not let you go. The love of God that calls you to this life, that calls you to this ministry of love, that love will not let you go. So stand firm and stand together. This strength of faith that we hear in Paul's letter is echoed in a poem that Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote when he was held in a Nazi prison. It's called Who Am I? And this is how Bonhoeffer says it. Who am I? They often tell me I would step from my cell's confinement calmly, cheerfully, firmly, like a squire from his country house. Who am I? They often tell me I would talk to my warders freely and friendly and clearly, as though it were mine to command. Who am I? They also tell me I would beat the days of misfortune equitably, smilingly, proudly, like one accustomed to win. Am I then really all that other men tell of? Or am I only what I know of myself, restless and longing and sick, like a bird in a cage, struggling for breath, as though hands were compressing my throat, yearning for colors, for flowers, for the voices of birds, thirsting for words of kindness, for neighborliness, trembling with anger at despotisms and petty humiliation, tossing in expectation of great events, powerlessly trembling for friends at an infinite distance, weary and empty at praying, at thinking, at making, faint and ready to say farewell to it all. Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once? A hypocrite before others and before myself, a contemptibly woebegone weakling? Or is something within me still like a beaten army fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine.